Hello and welcome back to Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at d1baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, joined as always by my good friend and co-host, Mark Etheridge. Of course, I would be remiss if I did not mention once again our new sponsor for Highway to Hoover. This episode of Highway to Hoover and every episode of Highway to Hoover moving forward is presented by Academy Sports and Outdoors, one of the great sporting good brands in our great country. I certainly a big part of Joe's upbringing. Academy Sports and Outdoors. No trip to Academy, Mark, was complete without taking a stroll down the aisle where they have the bats and just picking up all of them.
And swinging most of them. Yeah.
Right. Much to my mom's chagrin when I was 10. Yeah. Yeah. I was
don't
trying
break
to
anything.
swing them in the aisles. Yeah.
Right.
Or, you try on all the gloves and you play with the catcher.
Right.
I was never a catcher, so I always thought it was fun to play with the catcher's mitts. Yeah. And anyway, good fun to be had at Academy Sports and Outdoors. So thank you to those folks for sponsoring Highway to Hoover this 2025 season. Mark, today we're going to talk about Auburn, and you got a good look at Auburn in the fall, so I think I'm most interested in your takes there. But last season, I think it was you and I have talked about this. I think it can just kind of be summed up as every once in a while in this league, for the most part, with few exceptions, you're just going to have a year like that. There are a couple of programs that are kind of immune from it to a certain degree, but most of the SEC is just going to have a year like that every once in a while. And it was injuries. It was, they just didn't have some guys step up they thought might. There were a lot of things that went into it, but ultimately it was just kind of a lost year, and that's a bummer. But I think we're a lot more optimistic about how things are going as we head into 2025. And not just from the standpoint that we think a Butch Thompson coach team is not going to have 2 straight bad years, but that is a factor. It's not all because of that, but I have to admit that just given what he and his staff have accomplished since arriving there, like I have to imagine they're not going to have 2 bad years in a row, barring, catastrophic injury. No one can deal with that. But I feel pretty optimistic about a bounce back and Auburn being better this year. And I based on what I've heard you say, I think it's safe to say you feel that way as well.
Yeah, I was really impressed. I saw them in Pensacola. They swept a doubleheader from Florida State, a Florida State team that I was also impressed with. So that kind of take that for what it's worth. I do think that last year at Auburn, it displayed kind of a lack of depth, both in the lineup positionally and also on the mound. They just didn't have enough guys that if the first guys didn't come through, they're in this league, the margins are so small, you just couldn't deal with it. This year's different. They brought in a really heralded freshman class. They also brought in some really talented transfers, and the talent level, not just from the top of the roster, but just throughout. There's just more depth. There's more quality. And I think the result of that, you're going to see Auburn having a much improved season. I mean, for a team that struggled, I mean, they didn't make it to Hoover last year. I mean, I think they're a regional team. They're if things go right, they could even get into the host mix. I really believe in this team. But they do need some things to go well. Let's start positionally, because that is the strength of this team. Ike Irish is going to catch. He has, he was a DH as a freshman. He transitioned behind the plate last year, and it was a work in progress. There was some good. There was some, not as good as he kind of learned the nuances of that position, and that has continued to improve as a junior. I think, he's certainly much improved behind the plate, but then at the plate, I feel like he's one of the best hitters, pure hitters in the conference. He is going to fight every pitch. He's not going to give you anything. If you make a mistake, he's going to hammer it, especially off the wall and hit the Green Monster at Auburn. But he'll go all over he'll go, line to line. I mean, he's really, really an advanced hitter as far as using the whole field. I do feel like, as he's gone on, he's hit, he hit a lot of doubles as a freshman. He hit more homers last year, and I think this year he'll even hit more. from a slugging percentage. I think that he's got a chance to be one of the elite hitters in the country. And if so, that's gonna make Auburn so much better because he's got plenty of help behind him. Let's talk about Cooper McMurray. He's an older guy. He was at Kansas. Comes into Auburn, kind of a heavy, big first baseman. And this fall he was injured and missed a lot of time. And he spent that time getting into better physical shape. He's lost weight. He looks more athletic out there. I think he's a different player than the last time that most of us saw him play. And you wonder how that's going to transition, just being more agile. Certainly on defensive first base, scoring, from second on a single, those kinds of things. And we know he can hit. Okay. And then the other thing I want to call out, Eric Guevara was probably their best hitter. He certainly led them in average during the fall. He was injured most of last year. I think he's going to plug in at third base, but he's kind of a shortstop kind of guy. So then you've got, Derek Fabian, the Florida transfer who was there last year at Auburn at shortstop. You got Eric Snow, who's, came in from USF. He could end up at second. He could end up at short. And then you have the freshman, Chris Rimbert, who could also play second, and also he's going to play some outfield. And you've got a really strong defensive club because you've got so many shortstops. You got shortstops, second, third, and short, and they're just very athletic. And being able to make those plays defensively is going to help the pitching staff, which we'll get to in a minute. But I do think that having those guys in the infield, Irish behind the plate, they brought in Lucas Steele from Samford. He's a big power bat. He's going to DH. He's also going to be the backup catcher. They've got Cale Strickland, who's their best defensive catcher. So you've got options right there. And the other guy I didn't mention in the infield is Chase Fralick, freshman, advanced hitter, a left-handed bat. He could play some third. He could play some catcher. He could play first if something happens with McMurray. Just all these different options where last year you were kind of struggling if you're Auburn to – once you got to seventh in the order, it was like, all right, who's hot today? Who had a good BP? This year, they've got 12, 13 guys that they feel good about. And I think that's the primary difference. And then you look in the outfield, they brought in Bristol Carter from East Carolina. I think he's going to be center fielder. He's going to probably lead off, just a really tough AB. Bub Terrell, who's a really talented freshman. He's one of these, he looks the part. He's a big, tall guy who, especially as he grows into his body throughout his college career, I mean, the sky's the limit for this cat. I mean, he could be a first round, potential, and he's got a lot of power already, and he's still a pup at this point. The other guy, Cade Ballou, had some moments as a freshman last year. Really was kind of undervalued as he entered the season, and just got his opportunity and just made the most of it and kept getting better and kept better. He missed some time in the fall, but he's back healthy, and he's going to be in the heart of that lineup. So, I mean, it's a lineup that stacks up pretty well with the other teams in the conference. I mean, and we're talking about, these top 10 teams that have these gargantuan offenses. And I think Auburn's they're going to be able to hit with them. The question for them, and we can get into this after your thoughts here on their offense, is what will the pitching staff look like?
Yeah, I too am fascinated by the lineup from a depth standpoint, and then it's also interesting to me that there's kind of two subgroups here. There's veteran pieces, right? And I'm including Ike Irish in that, but it's also, Cooper McMurray, who's senior, and Derek Fabian, who's a senior, and so you've got some of that. But then you've got this really interesting group of young guys that haven't, either because they're freshmen, so they literally haven't had a chance to break through, or like Ballou, you mentioned, who looked pretty good in a small sample last season, but hasn't had that 250 plate appearance season yet. And that was a guy, you mentioned him, and that's a guy that, because, I mean, look, as the season started to go sideways on Auburn last year, it's just natural that, we kind of stopped paying as much attention to them, right? So I kind of missed some of what he was doing there, but it wasn't until I was looking at some of their numbers from last year that you realized that Ballou is on almost a 20 home run pace if he if you'd played a full season, right? And of course, it's not that simple, and the tape gets out there, yada yada. But it does go to show you that if he gets hot, he's the type of guy that can carry an offense. And then when you throw in the freshmen, Rimberton and Terrell in particular, and it strikes me that this has a chance to be a very good lineup right away. But it's almost scarier if yes, would Auburn like to have Ike Irish back next year and the year after? Of course, but it's almost scarier if I'm an SEC rival of Auburn that those young guys are going to start figuring it out. Yeah. And the lineup might actually end up being more dangerous in 2026 and beyond when some of these young people start to figure it out. Yeah. Those lineups might actually end up being a little bit better than the one we have now. We'll see. But if I'm an SEC club and it's like, oh gosh, I can't wait to get Ike Irish out of this league, I get that. But the guys coming up behind him might be just as good or better. So it's not necessarily getting rid of him, and the lineup suddenly becomes a lot easier to traverse because of the quality of the young players they have.
Yeah, and the guy that really stuck with me in Pensacola when I saw him was Rembert. A freshman. He was highly regarded, but not as high as some that we saw. But just an advanced hitter. He just kind of has some moxie, that you don't always see as a freshman. He just kind of gets it. And what's going to happen with him, is just like any other freshman. As you go through the league, people are going to understand how to pitch to you, and how does he make the adjustments to that. I do feel like that as Rembert, because he's got some versatility. He can play second, he can play left field. He's going to be in the lineup, based on different matchups. What does that look like? Is he going to hit 300 plus? Is he going to hit 10 to 15 home runs as a freshman and hit near the top of that lineup? I mean, that's anytime you add a freshman who's doing that, and just think about because you expect guys who've been in the program to elevate and have those kind of years, but if you can get that out of a guy straight out of high school, I mean that really changes your approach and your ceiling for the season.
I'm curious now on your take on the mound. I'm kind of fascinated by this Auburn program because it's been, for all the success they've had, let's just say post COVID, they get to Omaha in 22, they host a regional in 23, all of that. For all of that, they've been doing it a little bit differently than the Auburn that pre-pandemic, right? So like I associate Auburn like pre-2020 and Butch Thompson pre-2020 of like they went from Keegan Thompson to Casey Mize to Tanner Burns, like boom, boom, boom. And it was like, okay, Auburn's just always going to have that guy at the front. And post-pandemic, for all the things they've done really, really well, that piece has been missing. And that they've had a combination of guys who had really good arm talent that never totally were what you thought they could be. I'm thinking about like Chase Alsop the last couple of years, right? They had guys like that. And then they had guys like Vale from a couple of years ago, who it's like the stuff really, like he was never going to be, a heavily desired draft pick, a prospect, but he was really effective in that specific use case. Where they've kind of not had, where they've had a hole is just in having that one guy at the front of the rotation that they toss the ball to every Friday and say like, hey, we're better than 50-50 to win this game, which was something they used to have seemingly every year. And it sounds like, again, much like the lineup for me, no disrespect to Cade Fisher, who I think is probably going to have a little bit of a bounce back season this year, or Sam Dutton from LSU or what have you. I have a feeling if the next like stud workhorse Friday night ace for Auburn is on this roster now, it's probably one of these freshmen, and it just might not happen this season. That might be a 2026 thing, but given the talent in that freshman class, like I do feel fairly confident in saying that guy is probably on campus now. It's just a matter of figuring out which one it is and how to get the best out of him.
Probably so. I mean, there's some really good freshmen that are, I mean, they're going to have key roles. Christian Chatterton, just an advanced freshman, understands how to pitch. Jackson Sanders, just a really good fastball. He's going to have a key role, just depending on what it is at this point. I think Andreas Alvarez is another one who could have a key role. Another freshman again. Connor Gatwood. I mean, he's the guy. He was the draft guy. He was somebody that a lot of people didn't expect to end up in school, and he's from down here in my neck of the woods in Mobile. And just it's a big arm. I mean, it's 98, 99. He's going to probably hit 100 before the year's over. It's just, how's the command? How's the consistency, those sorts of things. So it's a really good freshman group. It's just a question of what do you get out of them this year, and what do you need to get out of them this year? Because you mentioned, I mean, having Cade Fisher from Florida, Sam Dutton from LSU, those are two guys who've been through it, throwing a lot of SEC innings, going to give you a chance every weekend. But one of the guys that I feel could really have an impact is Cam Tilley. He came on, he had moments, we'll call it last year. He has a pitch. He has a sinker. I guess it's a sinker splitter kind of thing that people are just not able to see. And if he's able to, put something around that, he could be a guy to really watch and become that ace on the staff. Another one to watch, Dylan Watts. Had moments last year, seemed to get better as the year went on. I think he's going to have a key role. And then Hayden Murphy. Hayden Murphy is probably going to be the closer. He pitched really well against Alabama in the season finale, the final series of the year. Summer ball, he pitched really well and just came back and picked right where he left off. He's been the kind of lockdown closer that Auburn honestly just hasn't had in a while, since Burkhalter. So you look at all those guys, and we haven't mentioned some of the returnees like John Armstrong or Parker Carlson or Connor McBride. I mean, some of these guys who've had some experience and had some innings, they could give you some help as well. And, as we kind of kick this thing off, there just wasn't enough pitching depth last year. Well, now it looks like that with the influx of talent, both from freshmen and transfers, that Auburn just looks like a different staff. Okay. Maybe there's not the top end guy. Of course, Tilley could become that. Gatwood could become that. Maybe one of the others, could become that. But I do think just having that many more options, that much more depth, is Auburn's going to be in a much better place, and they're going to hit. So they're going to have a little more margin for error than last year's club did. And I think as a result of that, they're going to be in the hunt. I really believe that they're going to have postseason baseball in June.
Yeah, I tend to feel the same. And I'm glad you mentioned in that pitching breakdown Hayden Murphy, because it was a guy that stood out to me just looking at some of the kind of the background data from his summer on the Cape.
Yeah.
Which was really, I mean, even at the surface level numbers are great, but so is the kind of the back end data. And Aaron Fitt wrote him up for our Cape Cod prospect reports and wrote a lot of good things about him. But one of the things he did write is that the slider is kind of loose and like it's but he's added the cutter. And I tend to, I hear some coaches and scouts bemoan pitchers adding a cutter for the sake of adding a cutter. But I think in this case, if the slider was kind of meh, maybe a cutter is just actually more the natural, the more of a natural fit for him, and maybe actually ends up being something that changes who he is. Obviously, they're looking at him maybe being a closer, and they're long as the list of closers who have made a living off of a cutter. So we will obviously see how that goes. But I'm with you. I guess my final thought here is that I'm with you on this. It felt like last year was a year where just a lot of things just went the wrong way, and they couldn't stop the snowball. And then when the injury bug bit, it just really got away from them. And but it feels like the talent's been upgraded across the board. There's kind of a new energy, I think, with the freshman class. So a lot of momentum here. So that there's obviously that on the field you can see it, but I think just in general that like ethereal like buzz, I think is there. with Auburn. So one of the teams I'm more excited to see come 2025, because I do think there's a chance that they are just a totally different team than what we saw last year.
Yeah, and you add in the ballpark renovations, Plainsman Park going through a redo. It's going to look like a totally different place from what I've been told. And there'll also be seats on the Green Monster, kind of a nod to Fenway here. I think that'll be interesting. I can't wait to go out there and just kind of check it out and see what that view looks like. I saw a video online, and I was kind of teetering a little bit. I don't like heights a whole lot, so it's going to be, you're going to have to kind of bring your big boy shorts if you're going to sit up there, because you're going to be up there high looking over, because that monster is up there.
So you don't want to do a live show from the top of the monster?
I can probably get acclimated, but those first few minutes I'm going to have to hold on to something.
Mark just holding on to the wall for dear life.
Yeah.
You're going to lose feeling in your arms.
Yeah, you're going to have to hold me, Joe.
But I mean, you're so, like, my biggest wish for the Plainsman Park renovations is that the air moves a little more in the press box.
Yeah.
Because
the press box is different. I mean, it's going to be down the first base line now, where the nice view from the press box that we had. Now that's luxury suites.
Rest in peace.
So,
I remember covering the regional there a couple of years ago, and I knew I'd made a mistake when because it was hot, because it's June, but it wasn't crazy, right? Like outside, it wasn't like 97 or something. Like it was just a normal hot June day. And I got to the press box and I realized I'd made a mistake when all of the local beat guys, shout out to our buddy, Jason Caldwell and others, had like their own fans, like portable fans clipped to the tabletop of the press box so that they could move the air in front of their faces. And I was like, oh no, that is a,
it's a veteran move on their part, and you had 100%. No idea.
I had no idea. Yeah, I mean, that's just the home field advantage right there. Like I just didn't know how the ball was going to bounce. But now, hopefully, not as much of an issue there. All right, that is going to do it for this edition of Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at d1baseball.com. A special thanks again to our presenting sponsor, Academy Sports and Outdoors. Excited to have those folks on board with us this season. Thank you to those who have gone on to Apple Podcasts, given us a 5-star review. I'll renew my message here that if you please, I always get stuck on that word, Mark. I don't know what it is. I just can't. That word just drops out of my brain every time I start that sentence. Renew the plea for some of those reviews, and if you leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and put a question in your review itself, we will answer that on the show, unless of course it's like lewd or vulgar.
And we still might answer it.
And we still might. If it's funny, we still might. I'm gonna be honest with you. If it's funny, I might read it, but no promises if it's lewd or vulgar. But otherwise, you can leave us a baseball related question in the comments there. We'll answer it on the show. And, we greatly appreciate you doing that. So thank you for that. Thank you to Mark, as always, for joining me. And thank you, the listener, for listening.